San Diego Bay, January 1953. A delta-winged jet fighter sits low in the water, its trailing edges kissing the surface, like a bird that cannot decide whether it belongs to the sea or the sky. Underneath the fuselage, two retractable hydroskis wait in their housing, metal legs folded beneath a machine that weighs 11 tons. Test pilot Sam Shannon advances the throttles. The Westinghouse turbojets scream. Salt spray erupts behind the aircraft, and the skis extend downward, biting the Pacific. At 125 knots, the nose pitches sharply upward, 17 degrees, and the Convair Sea Dart lifts free from the ocean. No runway, no carrier deck, just open water and an idea so ambitious that the Navy had ordered 12 production copies before this machine ever left the ground. The flying boat, the plane with a hull for a belly, had been reborn as a supersonic fighter, and like every rebirth, it started with a burial. The problem was concrete, or rather the lack of it. In the late 1940s, the United States Navy faced a contradiction that no amount of defense spending could resolve quickly. Jet engines were getting faster, but the carriers that launched them were not getting longer. Supersonic designs required takeoff rolls of thousands of feet. They approached at speeds that made carrier landings an act of controlled violence. The Navy's frontline fighters, the F-9F Panther, the F-2H Banshee, were subsonic, straight-winged, and obsolete against the swept-wing MiGs appearing over Korea. The Air Force had long runways and could afford to push past Mach 1. The Navy had wooden flight decks and arresting cables designed for propeller aircraft. And behind every tactical calculation sat a darker strategic fear: nuclear weapons. A single Soviet bomb on a carrier task force could erase an entire air wing in seconds. Dispersal was survival. Airfields could be cratered. Carriers could be sunk. But the ocean itself could not be destroyed. The idea of putting a hull on an airplane was not new. In 1912, a former bicycle mechanic from Hammondsport, New York, solved the same fundamental problem: how to fly where there were no runways, by strapping a boat to a biplane. Glenn Curtiss had built his first motorcycle engine from a tomato soup can and a gauze screen. By 1908, he held the land speed record at 136 miles per hour on two wheels. When Alexander Graham Bell invited him to join the Aerial Experiment Association, Curtiss brought an engine builder's instinct to a field dominated by glider men. His first seaplane experiments involved little more than bolting a canoe to the underside of a standard airframe. It did not work well. The hull stuck to the water like a suction cup, refusing to release. But a retired British naval officer named John Cyril Port suggested a radical fix: cut a step into the hull, a sharp notch that would break the water's grip at speed. Curtiss tried it on his Model E in 1912. The flying boat was born. Port returned to England when war broke out in 1914 and never crossed the Atlantic in the machine they had built together. The step, however, crossed everything. By 1938, the flying boat had grown into something its inventors would not have recognized: Juan Tripe de Mambin. The president of Pan American Airways had commissioned Boeing to build the largest airliner in the world, and Boeing delivered. The 314 Clipper weighed 40 tons, carried 74 passengers, and had a wingspan 3/4 that of a modern 747. Its four Wright double cyclone engines produced 6,400 horsepower combined. Inside, uniformed waiters served 5-course meals on linen tablecloths with crystal glasses. A one-way ticket from San Francisco to Hong Kong cost $760, roughly $17,000 in today's money. The hull that Curtiss had carved from a canoe was now a pressurized ocean liner with sleeping berths and a honeymoon suite in the tail. 12 Clippers were built. They made approximately 5,000 ocean crossings and flew more than 12 million miles. In 1943, one of them carried President Franklin Roosevelt across the Atlantic to the Casablanca Conference, the first sitting American president to fly. The flying boat had not merely solved the runway problem, it had turned the ocean itself into an airport, the harbor into a terminal, and the horizon into a route map. But the same war that gave the Clipper its finest hours also built the thing that would kill it: concrete runways, thousands of them, on every continent. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing. There is much more to come. The new runways made the flying boat commercially extinct by 1946. Pan American retired its last Clipper that year, each airframe having accumulated more than 18,000 flight hours. Faster, cheaper land planes. The DC-4, the Lockheed Constellation, could now reach the same destinations without the weight penalty of a watertight hull or the operational complexity of docking at a seaplane terminal. The era of the boat-bellied airliner was finished in barely a decade, but the military mind works on different timelines. While the airlines scrapped their hulls, the Navy looked at the same water and saw not obsolescence, but opportunity. If nuclear weapons could destroy every runway and every carrier in a single strike, then the only safe airfield was one that could not be targeted: the open sea. In 1948, the Navy launched a design competition for something that had never existed: a supersonic seaplane interceptor. The aircraft would need to exceed Mach 1, operate from remote bays or alongside submarine tenders, and defend the fleet without ever touching a flight deck. Convair entered the contest on October 1st, 1948. Their proposal was, in essence, a delta-winged F-102 interceptor mounted on water skis. Ernest Stout led the design team at Convair's Hydrodynamic Research Laboratory in San Diego. He was not an aeronautical dreamer. He was a hull engineer, a man who understood water the way most aircraft designers understood wind. His insight was that the flying boat's old problem, the hull stuck to the surface, could be bypassed entirely if the aircraft never sat in the water at all during its critical takeoff phase. Instead of a planing hull, Stout proposed retractable hydro skis, two metal blades that would extend downward on oleo struts, lift the fuselage clear of the surface at speed, and retract once airborne. The aircraft would float at rest, its delta wings trailing in the water, but take off like a water skier behind a speedboat. The Navy ordered two prototypes in January 1951 and, in an act of extraordinary confidence, contracted for 12 production aircraft before a single one had flown. The Sea Dart was built at Convair's Lindbergh Field plant and wheeled down a ramp into San Diego Bay in December 1952. Its first flight on January 14, 1953, was an accident. Shannon pushed the throttles too far during a taxi test, and the machine simply left the water. The official maiden flight came on April 9th. The takeoff roll averaged 28 seconds and about 2,300 feet. For a supersonic aircraft, that was remarkably short. The numbers, however, told a more complicated story. The intended Westinghouse J-46 engines were not ready, so the prototype flew on J-34s, each producing 3,400 pounds of thrust instead of the planned 6,000. The Sea Dart was badly underpowered. It could not break Mach 1 in level flight. The hydro skis vibrated violently during takeoff and landing, shaking the airframe so hard that the cockpit instruments were nearly unreadable. Convair redesigned the twin ski arrangement into a single ski, which improved stability but added complexity. When the J-46 engines finally arrived and were fitted to the first service test aircraft, they performed below specification. On August 3, 1954, the upgraded Sea Dart reached Mach 1.25, but only in a shallow dive at 34,000 feet. It remains the only seaplane ever to exceed the speed of sound. Then, on November 4, 1954, test pilot Charles Richburg took the Sea Dart up for a demonstration flight over San Diego Bay. Navy officials stood on the shore. Press cameras rolled, some broadcasting live on television. Richburg made a low-level pass at an estimated 575 miles per hour, lit the afterburners over the city center, and the aircraft disintegrated in midair. Richburg, a 31-year-old World War II Navy veteran, was pulled from the water but did not survive. Americans watched it happen on their television sets that evening. The crash did not kill the Sea Dart program. The Navy had already been losing interest before November 1954. The real executioner was a ship, the USS Forrestal, commissioned in 1955, the first of a new class of supercarriers displacing 60,000 tons. Forrestal-class flight decks were long enough, strong enough, and equipped with steam catapults powerful enough to launch supersonic jets. The problem the Sea Dart had been built to solve, the carrier too small for fast aircraft, was solved by building a bigger carrier. All 16 production Sea Darts were canceled. The remaining test aircraft made their final flights in 1957. 5 airframes survived. 4 went to museums. 1 sat in Navy storage until 1962. Officially stricken from inventory 5 years after its last flight, assigned the redesignation F-7 under a new tri-service naming system, a bureaucratic footnote for an aircraft that no longer existed as anything but aluminum and ambition. Curtiss had built the first flying boat from a canoe and a biplane. Stout had built the last from a delta wing and a pair of water skis. Between them lay 45 years, 12 million clipper miles, 1 supersonic barrier, and 1 inescapable truth. The truth was this: the flying boat never failed because the idea was wrong. It failed because the world built the infrastructure that made it unnecessary. Curtiss solved the problem of flying without runways. Pan American turned that solution into a global airline. The Navy tried to turn it into a weapon. Each time, which the boat-bellied aircraft did exactly what it was asked to do, until someone poured enough concrete or welded enough steel to make the asking pointless. Glenn Curtiss carved a step into a wooden hull on Lake Keuka in 1912. John Cyril Port refined it into a patrol bomber that hunted submarines across the North Sea. Boeing inflated it into a pressurized palace that crossed oceans with crystal glasses and sleeping berths. Ernest Stout compressed it into a dart that broke the sound barrier over San Diego Bay. The hull changed shape in every generation, but the premise never did: that water, the oldest surface on Earth, could serve as a runway for the newest machines in the sky. 4 surviving Sea Darts sit in museums today, skis retracted, engines silent, delta wings still angled as if waiting for the tide. Somewhere in the design files of every amphibious aircraft built since, the ghost of a canoe strapped to a biplane still floats. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and leave a comment. It helps more than you know. Until next time.